have been bitten by the bug again. Whoops, how did that get in there? Anyway, he has made a video against me from this channel right here. And you see, he honors John Bunyan and says Lordship salvation is heresy. I just find that amusing. But anyway, here is the video. Tulip is not the gospel. Some uninformed individuals on YouTube wrongly claim that Tulip is the gospel. Consider 1689 Baptist. He claims Tulip is the gospel. And there's my logo. But is Tulip really the gospel? Well, Charles Spurgeon seems to think so. And what is the heresy of Arminianism but the addition of something to the work of the Redeemer? Every heresy, if brought to the touchstone, will discover itself here. I have my own private opinions that there is no such thing as preaching Christ and Him crucified, unless we preach what nowadays is called Calvinism. It is a nickname to call it Calvinism. Calvinism is the gospel and nothing else. Charles Spurgeon. Monty says, look, total depravity is not part of the gospel. It is law, not gospel. Romans 3:20. The gospel is only about Jesus Christ and what He did for His people in 1 Corinthians 15:1-4. Well, Monty, is this so? Gordon H. Clark disagrees with you. This book, Today's Evangelism, Counterfeit or Genuine, Gordon H. Clark. On page 33, Clark is going over the different times gospel is used in the New Testament. The noun occurs about 75 times in the New Testament, 4 times in Matthew, and 5 times in Mark. The opening words to the second gospel are, the beginning of the gospel, and the account, the gospel itself, follows. The gospel is what Mark wrote down, or at least what Mark wrote down is the beginning of the gospel. Mark 1:15 commands us to believe the gospel. In addition to Romans 1:9 and 10:16, chapter 2:16 says that God shall judge according to my gospel. Now let's stop right here for a minute. What is 2:16 in the middle of? Paul is teaching for 3 chapters, 1, 2, and 3, of the total depravity of man. In Romans 3:19, he says that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. Now back to Clark. He says Paul had been preaching certain standards of justice. He had been condemning sin. Can we say total depravity? He was in the process of exposing the wickedness of the Jews. In this verse, he says that God's judgment will be based on the principles of justice that he has been expounding. To be sure, chapter 2 does not expound all the gospel, but the gospel contains these principles by which God judges. If we today are to preach the gospel rather than some other message, the ideas of this chapter, Romans 2, must be included. Some recent books on evangelism say they should not. It would be tedious to quote all 75 verses that use the word gospel, but 1 Corinthians 15:1 contains a part of the message not mentioned in Romans 2. Now wait a minute. I thought 1 Corinthians 15:1-4 contained the entire gospel. Clark says it's only part. And it's a part that's not in Romans 2. So Monty, I think you need to rethink some of this. In brief, it says, the gospel which I preach unto you explains. how that Christ died for our sins, and that he rose again the third day. This is the gospel by which also ye are saved. The gospel, therefore, is a message. Moreover, brethren, this is 1 Corinthians 15:1. Moreover, brethren, I declare unto you the gospel which I preached unto you. This is past tense. I preached unto you. And he's declaring it again. All this is right here is a brief summary. There's a lot more to the gospel than what's just found in 1 Corinthians 15:1. This is a brief summary. This is what you must believe. But Clark himself is even saying that there's more to the gospel than just 1 Corinthians 15:1 through 4. 1 Corinthians 15:3, how that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he arose again the third day according to the Scriptures. Now, Monty, please tell me, what good is it to have a Christ that died for my sins if I am not a sinner? I cannot savingly believe that Christ died for my sins unless I first believe I am a depraved sinner deserving of God's wrath. And yes, total depravity is good news, because the blacker my sin, the brighter the light of Christ is shed abroad in my heart.